All right, we are back, and if you have not gotten all the information, it's on banddirectorstalkshop.com. You can look at the first article and get everything there that you need. I'm excited to have Dr. Eiben come. I will let her introduce herself, because if I do, I was talked about a long time ago, and she has much more things she's done since then. So I'm going to let her introduce herself. Here she is.
Well, hello again. Again, my name is Lyndsay Eiben. And yes, Tamari was one of my middle school band directors. She had to suffer through the year that I learned to play flute as a beginner, so sorry, Tamari. And I've made lots of wonderful memories since then. My career has been really interesting, actually. So when I went to school, I'm actually a West Texas alum, and then I went to Cincinnati Conservatory and I did my doctorate in flute performance. And so I was all performance, hardcore for a long time. And then it was really interesting because my first job, I was a band director. I was a middle school band director. And so I kind of took off with that. I actually never student taught. I don't have a degree in education. But I do have 10 years experience as a band director. And so I didn't realize I was going to like it as much as I did. And I became really passionate about music education. So it just kind of goes to show you, sometimes, you think you're on one path and you end up taking a completely different path, and it was okay for me. So what's fantastic in my current position at the university, first of all, I worked with Jeff and Trey for, I believe it was 8 wonderful years at Permian High School, and I treasure those years forever because of how much I learned from them, and it was just a really great experience, and I think it molded me as a teacher, and I'm actually really glad that I started out becoming a band director before I went to academia. So I took the plunge into academia a couple years ago, and now I am running the music education program. And so I get to supervise student teachers. I help young teachers apply for jobs, find jobs, make connections, and I'm also the flute professor. And side note, I'm the principal flutist of the West Texas Symphony, and I also play in a woodwind quintet professionally, and so I get to do all the things, which is awesome in my current position. I get to teach flute, music education. I still assist with band. I'm actually conducting a region band in January, so I still get to do that. And I still play professionally. So it's a lot of things, and I like that I get to do it all. So West Texas has been a wonderful place for me. So, all right, I have a lot to cover today, so I'm going to try to just jump right in. Okay, so we're going to navigate the flute today, hopefully. So this is what we're going to cover today: the physical setup of the instrument and the physical setup of how we hold the instrument, the flute, to the body. Early stages of tone development. We're going to touch on flexibility again, but we're going to go in more detail with just specific things. Vibrato, articulation, and double tonguing and technique. I'm probably going to spend a lot of time in early stages, flexibility and vibrato, that area. Technique and double tonguing, if I don't get to it, it isn't really an issue because I think it's a little more straightforward, but that's the bulk of the presentation will be in that middle section. So hopefully that's okay with you guys. All right, so I know most of us have a flute, yes? Yeah. So let's talk about the physical setup of the instrument, and we're going to start with putting it together. I know you guys probably know some of this stuff at least, but I thought I would go over it again real quickly. So when you're teaching a 6th grader how to put the instrument together, it's really important that they understand that the different parts of the flute are quite delicate, so they want to carefully put the flute together without putting pressure on the rods or the keys. So the first thing that I have my students do is I have them take the body, which is the middle part, and the foot joint, and notice that I'm grabbing at the end of the foot joint. I'm not putting any pressure on the keys or on the rods, and I'm gently putting it together like this, okay? And just so everybody knows, there is this ride right here on the foot joint. It goes down the middle of the keys, and that's where we start. Understand, it doesn't have to stay that way. We can adjust it according to the length of the student's fingers. So sometimes if I'm teaching a 6th grader with smaller hands, I'm going to rotate that inwards just a little bit. But some of us try to line up the rods, and that is incorrect. So just be sure that we don't do that, because you want it to naturally fit the form of the student's hands. And hopefully you can see this on the camera. Okay, good so far? Great. And then I usually switch hands. I'm still holding by the barrel, and that's when I put the head joint into the body. These joints should go together easily. If they don't, it means that your flute needs to be cleaned. So the joints oftentimes need to be wiped down. Me as a flutist, because I play all the time, I play a lot, I usually do it daily. And I just take my same cleaning cloth and I just wipe down those joints so that they don't get gunky. So if it's hard to put together and they're shoving it in, it needs to be cleaned. So try not to, put too much pressure on the flute. And that's basically how to put it together. Questions on that? I teach maintenance and care on the flute right away. So the very first day when they take their instrument apart, we go over how to clean it. Okay? So we have, we call this a tuning rod, but it actually has two purposes. One is for setting the head joint. I'll show you that here in just a second. And the second purpose is for actually cleaning the flute. So I always say it's kind of like a needle and thread. We're just going to stick the cloth into this part. And I personally like to cover the end, and then I will swab out the flute, all three pieces. And they, of course, they have to take it apart before they swab it out. They need to do this after every time that they play. And mostly it's because you can get mildew and gunk built up inside the instrument. It's pretty gross. If it starts to smell, you know they're not cleaning it properly, probably. And also it can affect the life of your pads. Your pads will not last as long if you do not swab out properly every single time you play. Okay? Questions so far? You can raise your hand if you have anything. When you get to the head joint, oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Do you have a trick for when the foot joint slides too easily?
Slides too easily. Yeah. So I was going to say sometimes just like a little piece of a tape, you can just to kind of ghetto rig it. You can also, well, you have to be very careful when you do this. You can kind of get to where you can expand the end of the flute a little bit. I've seen some people take a drumstick and sort of do that. You just have to be careful. And I understand we don't always have access to repair. And I've gotten pretty good at, ghetto rigging things over the years just because, we have so many kids and we don't always have access to that. So there's little things like that that you can do. If you wipe it down and it's still really gunky, something that you can do is you can carefully get some hot candle wax and put it on the edge of the flute and then just kind of let it sit there for a second and then just wipe it off. And it kind of acts as a lubricant, and so you can put the flute together more easily.
Are you sending that cleaning rod throughout the whole body or half and half?
Throughout the entire body. So would you like me to show you?
Push it through?
You can push it through. So what I'm doing is, again, it's like a needle and thread. So I'm going to put this through the top of the tuning rod. And I would recommend not using metal tuning rods, by the way. Your students can tear up their flute. I like the wood ones. Okay, and sometimes they have good plastic ones as well. And then I like to cover it like this so that we're covering the edge of the tuning rod or the cleaning rod. They kind of have both names. And then I like to kind of twist as I push it all the way through. And I can just kind of use my finger like that, and then I pull it through. You just do this very carefully. And notice, where did I hold it? By the barrel, because I'm not putting pressure on the keys or on the rods, right? Did that answer your question? Okay, and then when it comes to checking the head joints, we know that the other side of the tuning rod has this little line that has a purpose. So we're going to stick it inside the head joint, and we look at the tuning, the tone hole, and we want to make sure that it's fairly centered. Okay, now mine is, maybe needs a little bit of adjustment actually, but it's, you want to make it centered. And if anything, if that line is a little further outward, that's okay too, because typically flutes are tuned kind of sharp. So if you have a flute that's unusually sharp, do most of us use 200 series Yamahas for our babies, for our beginners? Those are sharp flutes. So I recommend to even have that line a little more outwards so that the flute is tuned a little bit lower and it makes it easier for pitch. Okay, questions?
So the farther out will play louder.
That's correct, yes. Just like anything else, the longer you make the instrument, the lower in pitch it is.
So if we wanted to move it out, how would we adjust it?
Oh, really good question. Okay, so you have to carefully unscrew the crown, okay? And then you're going to put a little bit of pressure this way. I'm not going to do it on mine. I actually have kind of a more special head joint. So, but you just push it out and you're just very careful with it. Okay? If the cork doesn't move easily, sometimes the cork is a little bit swollen. And again, that can change the temperature and level of humidity. So it just depends on where you live. All right. We all know this, hopefully, the parts of the flutes, but I just have a nice picture there for you. Okay. All right. Oh my goodness. I am so big on right hand position. This is a thing for me. I even see professionals do the first picture. I see professionals do that. So do me a favor. Can you raise your right hand? Can you bend your hand backwards like you're a waitress or a waiter? Okay. Now wiggle your fingers. All right, now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to completely relax the hand, and now we're going to wiggle our fingers. Do you feel the difference? So this causes tension in your hands. Yeah, so we want to make sure that the elbow isn't outwards and that the wrist is straight. If the wrist is bent, you're causing tension, or your students have tension. Okay? All right. And then of course we want to center the pads of the fingers on the keys. We see this all the time with students. They like to let those fingers hang over the keys, so we have to be careful. I'm mostly just showing really common issues that I've seen with students over the year. These are the most common with the right hand position, okay? And if anything, we want the thumb not necessarily under the flute. I tend to put the thumb a little more towards the back side of the flute, like this. Okay, and that keeps the wrist straight, it keeps the fingers curved and relaxed, and I don't have any tension. Okay, and then the right thumb, this is what I was already talking about, but we tend to, I call this hitchhiker thumb. It's like they're trying to hitchhike, right? So this is bad. Okay, and then many times students put their flute like this under, they put the thumb over the flute and they put it right there into that groove. They try to just do funny things. But again, I have like a permanent dent, it seems like, because I play flute so much on my thumb, and it just sits right there on the tip of my thumb towards the back side of the flute. Okay? And this is really important because this is going to affect not only the right hand, but it affects this. It affects the position of the tone hole, which is going to affect their sound. So hand position is really, really, really important. Okay? Great. The thing that probably the very first hurdle that your sixth graders are going to have to get over is how to properly hold the flute and how to balance the weight of the flute. Let's be real, the flute to hold it is an extremely awkward instrument, yes? So they have trouble not only like figuring out what they're doing with their bodies, I've seen all kinds of stuff, but they also don't know how to disperse the flute, the weight of the flute evenly. So that's what we're going to talk about next. Okay. All right, so position of the left hand, I like to teach it in 3 really simple steps. And so I have them find the first 2 keys, and I say, okay, you're going to put your fingers in between the first 2 keys, in between your first 2 knuckles. And I always call this karate chop. It's like, hiya, and so we were really silly with it, things like that. So that's step 1, is just finding that position. Step 2 is we're going to bend the wrist. We're going to bend the left wrist slightly under the flute. And again, I can even say kind of like this. This you do want to do like a waiter. We do want the left wrist to be bent, but we want the right wrist straight. And then we just curve the fingers over the flute. And that's it. It's really that simple. And once they get that, then they're able to kind of figure out how to get it to their mouth. Okay? Great. Okay, and this is where we talk about the weight of the instrument. They need to find, there are 3 main points of contact to distribute the weight of the flute. So these are the only 3 places that weight should be held, if that makes sense. If you're relying on other places, like your pinky or things like that, you're not holding the flute correctly. So sometimes the way that I like to test is I'll say, okay, I want you to hold the flute like this and lift up all your fingers. So these fingers have nothing to do with holding the weight. Does that make sense? Okay, so we have 3 points. It's going to be the chin, the left hand, and the right thumb, and that is it. The other, so it's this way, and I'm making sure that my flute is perpendicular to my nose. Okay, and then the last part is this 360 plane in reference from the flute to the face, not too close to the body. I call these flute huggers, where they tend to play a little like this. We developed this in marching band, don't we? Yeah. But I hate it. I'm like, ugh. So because as soon as marching band's over, I say, okay, we're going to do this. Okay, so I'll show you pictures here of that in just a second. But we really want the feeling of the flute to be pushed out away from the body a little bit, almost like we're swinging open a door. We don't want it to be too close or too tight to the body. Okay, and what that looks like is this. So I have 2 examples. I have sitting versus standing. So let me pull up a chair here real quick. I see this all the time, and I'm probably, if I walk around rehearsals, we'll see it at band camp, where our knees are together and our hips are straight forward. Yeah, feel free to stand if you can't see me. And we it's really close to our body. And our flute is behind the person who is next to us. And that's just incorrect. You're probably going to feel a lot of strain, especially on your left shoulder, in your left shoulder blade. That's very uncomfortable for the students. I understand that they can't always have their own stand, And it's a really large band sometimes, but the correct way to do this comfortably is I'm going to take my left leg, and it's going to go straight down the middle of the chair. My right leg is sort of at an angle, and my hips are at a 45. Okay? And then I'm pushing my flute in the opposite direction of my hips. And if you can feel that in the chair, it is so much more comfortable. And the flute needs to sit in front of the person next to you, never behind. I'll say it again. The flute needs to go in front of the person next to you, never behind. It's so uncomfortable the other way. All right? And then if I just stand up, that's my standing position, pretty much. So when I play, I do the same thing. I have my right foot back, my left foot forward, my hips are at a 45. Even if I perform a recital, you're going to see me stand exactly like this. And I'm able to move a little bit. I can shift my body weight comfortably, and I can project, and it's just a very comfortable playing position. So it's really the way to do it. And I did these pictures in my living room, so I hope you like them. And I set up a screen. Okay, this is a fun debate. Plugs or no plugs? How many of us use plugs in beginner band? Is that okay? Of course it is. It's okay. Whenever I taught 7th grade beginners, though, I used to tell them it was packing material, and I'd make them take it out. But again, it depends on, I understand if you're teaching 6th grade beginners, for some reason there's such a difference between 6th and 7th grade beginners. Their hands are tiny, and so it is totally okay to use plugs, but I encourage you they need to completely remove those plugs by the end of the first year, unless they just have abnormally small fingers or hands, okay? The hardest to remove is going to be this one. Your ring finger on the left hand is going to be the last one to remove, and it's the most difficult, okay? I would recommend, too, if you're buying beginner flutes, do we know about offset and inline G? Okay, so we see these first 3 keys right here on the flute. Do you notice that my keys are offset? And some of you probably have offset flutes, some of you probably, that one's inline. I recommend from now on, I am sold. I was an inline player all the way up until, 2 or 3 years ago? I switched, and I'm like, why didn't I do this sooner? This was dumb. So, and I even played professionally like that. So I really just recommend just get the offset. It doesn't cost any extra usually. It's just an option. It's kind of either or. So get your 200 series Yamaha flutes, which is what I recommend for beginners, with the offset G. It just will make life so much easier. Okay. All right, any questions about plugs? It kind of just depends, but they really need to be out typically by the end of the first year. All right, let's grab our NumoPro. So there are 2 different types of NumoPros. You've probably seen the ones that have all the same color fans. Kathy Blocky is amazing. She's the inventor of the NumoPro. I actually met her a couple of times. She's a very nice person, very soft-spoken. She's wonderful to work with, and she's very also passionate about music education. So I recommend if you can ever even follow her on Instagram. She has her own Instagram, and she's always posting little flute videos and things, and I just love her. I think she's great. So she does sell the ones that have all the same color fans. I recommend getting this type, which is a newer type that has the different color fans. Because it's really easy to tell your beginners, okay, we're going to aim for red fan, or we're going to aim for a yellow fan, or whatever. All right, so let's talk really quickly about the NumoPro. We want to make it as close to a setup of the head joint as possible. So the same thing, it's going to fit all the way into the chin. I'm trying to find that inside edge is right directly under the inside edge of the lip line. So I'm going under the lip, not on. If it's on, it's too high, right? And that's a very common problem. Then I'm also making sure that this black part actually serves a purpose. You want this black thing right here to be flat, okay? And she even made it to where you could balance a penny on top of this. So if the penny drops, the student knows that it's not in the right position. So I would recommend doing that. I think it's a great thing to do. But many times your students are going to do this. And you can see me from the side. It's too rolled in, okay? We need to be sure that it's here. All right, typically the first fan that I have my students aim for is red. And the reason is because most of the time, the air is not going to be straight across the tone hole. It's not most of the time. If it is, that's why your flutes play sharp. Okay? It needs to be a downwards angle. So I teach right away, we're going to aim for that red fan. And what's great too is all the breathing things that we were just talking about in the band clinic that we just did. I do the same thing on the NumoPro, and what's great is they have a physical, they can see when their air stops or when it slows down. That's what I love about this thing. It's a brilliant invention. And so we'll even practice breathing and whole notes and things. As we're learning what a whole note is versus a half note, we actually do it with the fan spinning. And the students can see it, and if you're playing with it right now, you can see when the fan stops. And so it's a really great way to teach a beginner about air direction and about air usage. Okay? And then the other fans, and she has a really, if you want to scan the QR code, you can. It just takes you directly to the Kathy Blocky website, and it has much more information, detailed information on the NumoPro. So I put that up there because I don't have time to go over all of it, but it's just a good resource for you so you can read all of that. The different fans are just going to represent different air directions. I typically start with red and yellow because when we're teaching beginners, we start in the middle of the range. And as we get into more extreme ranges, of course, we're going to aim for green when we're getting in the really low register. I would say like G and below. And then when we get to the really high register, I would again say like G and above, I'm going to use that blue fan. But I don't really use those yet until I get to those registers. Okay? All right. Questions? Yes?
Does the size of your bottom lip matter? Like, what?
Really great question. Yes, it does. So for my students who have larger bottom lips, I'm usually actually going to put exactly what I just told you not to do. I'm going to put the head joint slightly higher than I typically would for someone with a larger lip. Most students though, however, I would say 80-90% of them are going to be under the lip. It's pretty rare when I have to do that, but if I have a student with abnormally large lips, well, I'll be honest, I probably put them on tuba instead of, but I kind of look for that too whenever they're a beginner. I kind of think about that. I'm not saying that a student with really large lips cannot play flute. They can and do very, very well, but it can be a little bit more complicated because of the placement. Yes?
I'm just curious, have you ever had any students with the teardrop? And
Yes.
So how did you work with them?
Really great question. So yes, I have had students with the teardrop. A lot of times when they're trying out the instrument, I talk to the students and I say, you can play flute, you can, but I need you to understand it's probably going to be a little bit more difficult for you. I make the parents and the student understand that right away. We're going to have to do some different things with you, but if you're really passionate about flute, I'm not going to ever say no to a student. I know band directors who will flat out say, you have a teardrop? Nope, you are not playing flute. So basically they have to have a side aperture. They cannot have the aperture down the middle. I typically like to go a little more to the left, me personally, because I think it makes it easier. So they just need to be taught to play their aperture slightly to the side around the teardrop, and that's why it does make it a little more difficult. And it just comes with training and watching, making sure, hopefully you guys have mirrors on every single stand every single day so the students can see what they're doing. And then you're going to have to work with that student, but they have to understand it's going to be a little more tricky. Not that they can't do it, but it is a little more difficult. Okay? All right, I'm going to go on. I have so much. All right, so this is a really great one. So we already talked about the inside edge of the tone hole should sit slightly below the lip. Align the tone hole centered under the aperture, not under the nose. Under the aperture, okay? I don't know if you guys have ever seen Dennis Bryakoff. He's a really famous flute player. He is now principal of LA Phil, I believe. He was formerly in Chicago. He is one of the greatest flute players ever, in my opinion. I love him. His aperture is way the heck over here. So where is his tone hole? It's way the heck over here. So it needs to be centered under the aperture, not under the nose. I've also known some band directors too, they've asked me, should I try to change the aperture to force it to be in the middle? No, do not. Do not. You want playing the flute in any instrument, for that regard, to be as natural as possible. And so if they're already naturally playing towards the side, which I don't know if you've noticed this, I play to the side. My aperture is not in the center. Don't change something that's naturally already happening, if that makes sense. Okay, so all you have to do is just move the head joint over. Yes?
So do you test that, when you're testing the head joint, do you have them do something before you put the head joint to them to find out if their aperture's in the front or the side, or?
Absolutely, we just do a finger, or we'll do NumoPro, but just using your finger, and we're looking in the mirror, and a lot of times it's as easy as make your face look like mine, look in your mirror, and check it, and then I will always walk around, check each individual student in a beginner class, and then I'll even tell them that, hey, your aperture is actually slightly to the left. that's okay. And I'll even tell them mine is too. You know, it doesn't have to be in the center. I try not to freak them out. And then I'll just let them know, you need to look for that in your mirror and be sure it's centered.
Okay.
And it really affects the sound. Okay? All right. Oh, did I mention it's really important to look at them from the side? And this is why. You see this? Would you be able to see that from the front? No. So important. You have to look at your student from multiple angles. So what that is there's space between the bottom of the lip plate and the face. And that is bad. That means that they're too rolled in and they're too high on their lip. You can't see that from the front, though. You have to see it from the side. Okay? So the middle one is ideally what we want. And these are, of course, all me. This is my face. So, okay. All right, and then real quickly, head joint alignment. You know, we've already kind of talked about this. This is, I think this is a little bit of a point of controversy in the flute world, absolutely, because there are some professionals who tend to play a little bit more rolled in to where it's actually kind of more like this, where the tone hole is rolled in towards the rods. They say it gets a better sound. I say no. I say it limits your flexibility and it causes you not to be able to play very well in tune. So I subscribe to the theory of we need to have that tone hole just in line with the first key, even if it needs to be a little bit more outward. For my fuller lipped students, the tone hole will have, the tone hole will have to be rolled out a little bit more. Okay, but typically it's just right there in the center. And we can adjust this too. I kind of start at a base position for all my students, if that makes sense, and then I adjust as necessary. Okay, so that's about where we want it. And the way I do it, I just close one eye. I'm actually left-eyed on it, so I close my right eye and I look down and just make sure that it's aligned. Okay, and yes, by the way, I do put nail polish on every single one of my students when they're a baby. It does not hurt the flute. Assure the parents, it does not hurt your flute. And you don't want to use acetone, of course, to rub it off. It'll just come off with a fingernail scratch, and it won't hurt the instrument, I promise. And I don't do like a huge smear. I just do 2 little dots so that they can practice lining it up correctly. Okay? All right. Yay, my favorite topic, as you know. So what does this mean? What does being flexible on the flute mean? Well, it means that they're able to change their air direction smoothly and easily, and this is going to make playing larger intervals so much easier. It also is going to make pitch control so much easier as well. So there's a lot. Flexibility is just such a huge thing. And yes, it should be taught from the very beginning. I do it very simply with beginners, but if you're not doing some sort of little flexibility every single day with your beginners, then you're missing out because they're going to learn air control and pitch control at a very early age, and it's going to create that foundation for what they're going to be able to do later. So flexibility every day. Now I'll show you in a minute how simply you can start and how you can make it a little more challenging. Okay? So let's first go to the Pneumo Pro. And again, I tell you at the very beginning, I start with these 2 fans. I start with red and then yellow. So what I'm teaching is I'm trying to go smoothly between red and yellow, and I don't ever want, basically my yellow fan needs to start spinning before my red fan stops. Can you tell me why? My yellow fan, as I move my air up, needs to start spinning before the red one stops.
Steady airstream.
Steady airstream, because so many times our students change their air with this change. Okay? So I'm aiming my air low and then I'm moving it upwards. And I'm getting up to that yellow fan. Okay? So, and I oftentimes do this in half notes. I'll say we're going to go red, yellow, red, yellow. And we're just practicing going up and down with the airstream. Such an important fundamental. The way I'm achieving this, by the way, if you already saw me, my bottom lip is moving forward and then it's coming back. It's all with the bottom lip. Okay? It's kind of like, I used to tell my girls too, it's, most of the time we have girl flute players, it's like when you're blowing your bangs out of your face. It's my bottom lip comes out so my air goes upward. The more the bottom lip is out, the more up the air goes. It really is that simple. Okay? Yeah? All right, so that's the very first basic flexibility exercise that I do with my students is on the Pneumo Pro. All right, and once we accomplish that, let's go ahead and grab our head joints. Now we're going to do the head joint exercise, but I'm going to cover the end. And the reason I'm doing that is because this is first an easier flexibility exercise than doing it uncovered, so we're going to do covered first. And if they have trouble with it, we'll even go back and forth between the PneumoPro and the head joint. I'll say, okay, let's go back to the PneumoPro. Let's do some yellow to red fan stuff, and then we're going to go back to the head joint. And again, this is, as soon as your students have their instruments or as soon as you're starting to play, this is like really early stages of beginning flute class, okay? So I'm doing, it is an awkward interval, but these are the two pitches that you want to hear. And I'm covering the end, okay? Shall we try it together? I'm going to do half notes. We're going to do low, and then we're going to do high. Here we go. 2, low, high. Stop. Okay, so for those of you who were not getting the upper pitch, this is what I always tell my students. It's okay, but you are not moving your lip enough. You need to move more. You need to move more. So the bottom lip has to come more forward in order for that air to go upwards. Something else I remind them of, how many of you felt like you blew stronger air on the second note? Bad. Don't do that. Okay? We want to try to make both of these even. We don't want to blow harder on the second note to get the second pitch to happen. Because why? When they play in third octave, I guarantee they're going to be 30, 40 cents sharp all the time. Because they learn that in the fundamental, and that's not how we do it. It's a steady airstream. I'm just moving the air up. I'm not blowing harder. So we're trying to achieve the same volume on both notes. Here we go again. 2, low, high. Good. And then we'll practice going back and forth, because starting high and then slurring down is a different fundamental, right? It is. It feels a little different. So now let's start high and then low. And this is exactly how I do it. I always demonstrate first, and then the students play. Breathe. High. Low. Just like that. Okay? And we'll go back and forth. I'll have the metronome going, and we'll just kind of go back and forth like that. Okay? And then I'll say, okay, we're going to do quarter notes. Challenge mode, we're going to go a little faster. And then I'll eventually do eighth notes. And we're just getting used to that fundamental. Okay? Once we get really good at that, by the way, you're already putting the flute together at this point, and I'm doing octave slurs on F, because it's going to feel very similar to covering. Even if they haven't been able to get the top note to speak yet, still have them do octave slurs on F, and just say, hey, it takes more time with some students than it does with others. Sometimes a student, it takes them a little while to get that fundamental, but keep working on it. I always say it's not a matter of if, it's when. And something else that my students say, they'll say, Dr. Eiben, I can't do it. And I'll say, you're missing one word. That word is yet. I can't do it yet, but I will be able to. So just try to keep encouraging, being very positive. Okay, let's uncover. We're going to do the same thing, yeah? Okay, here we go. This one's going to be challenge mode. Breathe. Okay, this is what I heard from a lot of you. What's wrong with that? We blew harder on the second note, so we call that overblowing. So don't blow harder. It's the same airstream. It's just going higher. Now here's the question: will the airstream get faster naturally on its own? Yes, because if we know anything about what's happening, the aperture gets slightly smaller as we go upwards. So the airstream is smaller and it's faster. So you don't have to do it here. It happens naturally here. Okay? Well, we're going to try it one more time. Ready? Right away, it's okay, keep working on it, and I'm trying to show you my side as I do it. Maybe not everybody can see it, but I'm pouting a lot as I do this, okay? All right, and then once we get really good at that, here's just some common issues with embouchure that I've seen before. So the check mark is good. My corners on the other side are pulled back in a smiling position. You see how my corners are going upwards? Very common. That's going to cause tension in the embouchure, and it's stretching my lips, and I don't want my lips to feel stretched. I want them to have a lot of cushion, okay, for the bottom lip. So my corners should be slightly down in a frowning position. Everything should feel like it's pushing forward towards the lip plate, not pulling backwards in a smiling position. Okay, so that's a very common thing to see with young students, and also that the aperture is too big. I always talk about like the tip of the end of a pin, like that's how small we want to try to get that embouchure. Students try to achieve this by pushing and causing tension in the embouchure Really, the way that you get the aperture hole smaller is by pouting more. Many times they're just not pouting their bottom lip enough. The more you pout, the smaller the hole will be. Okay? So we don't want to achieve that with tension. All right, great. Okay, we already talked a little bit about this, but the air direction, again, should be at a downward slope most of the time. But the angle of the air is dependent on two things. Number one, the register. So the higher the note, the higher the air in general. Number two is the volume. So if you're playing, you're going to love this. If you're playing, well, hopefully, if you're playing, say, a high F on flute, and you're playing very loudly, like you're supposed to be really playing something loud, this is what you're doing. Okay, if anybody has a tuner out, I'm probably 40, 50 cents sharp, I mean really sharp. So as I play louder, I'm actually not going to keep my air up. I'm going to aim my air more down. So it's the same thing with pitch. If I'm playing sharp, I probably need to change my air direction down. So watch my face if you can. I'll do it in two places so you guys can see it too. Did you hear the air direction change? Did you hear the sound get better?
Yep.
Oh yeah. So it's also less airy, right? Thank you, sorry. So all I did was change the direction of my air. So as I play loud, especially in the third octave, you have to make the angle of the air go downward more. Otherwise, they're going to be really screechy and really sharp.
Lyndsay, how do
Okay.
they not drop to the bottom octave when they, you know what I mean? Like,
Yes. Okay, so mostly what I'm doing there is I'm actually putting more space between my teeth, but you notice that I'm still pouting. So we can do it like this. I'm still pouting. And by the way, with the upper register too, you typically won't drop the octave because of the fingering.
more like
But
if
you're
you're
talking-
playing a high C really loudly, how would they?
So you're talking about high C or just above the
Just
register?
above the sound.
Well, I'm not really talking about so much that C.
Okay.
This
Higher,
is more
higher.
high.
Okay.
I would say more like F, G, A, B, way up there is really when I do this. And C, I actually do still play pretty open when I'm playing loud. But it's just a matter of also learning the control of where I put my lips, how far I open, all these things. They just learn it as they go. Okay? You can describe it until you're blue in the face, but until they feel it, they don't really know. Okay, so this is like a very first baby flexibility exercise that I do with my beginners. And by the way, yes, these are also the first pitches that I teach my students. Probably the very first note is B natural, actually. And the reason is because we have the thumb down. So they have trouble sometimes when the thumb is up because they always put it over here and they're having trouble balancing the weight. So I would recommend to start with your very first note being thumb down, just because they're still trying to figure out balancing the weight of the instrument. I do not recommend starting on that middle F. That should not be their first note. But you know what? Every single beginner flute book starts on that F, and it makes me crazy. It's not a comfortable note to start on. I would not. I would start lower than that, lower in the register, because we're really trying to get them comfortable in that low register. And then once we feel really comfortable again with the flexibility exercises, then we can practice on the low F and then slurring up to the middle F. And then maybe you can dive into those beginner books once you get really good at this exercise. Okay, and it's just a very simple one. And yes, I teach B natural first over B flat. And it's just a really simple exercise that we do as beginners, and we're incorporating that flexibility, and we're also working on the low range. And it's just really comfortable fingers because we're just putting down one finger at a time. And then I even change up different patterns from there, but this is the very first thing that we do. Okay? All right, and then eventually we'll get into harmonics, into our daily routine. So you already saw these in your in the band clinic that we just had a second ago, but I use these same exercises in the flute setting. So again, it starts with just an octave and just a basic octave slur. And by the way, when I first do these, the notes that they already know are C, B, A, G, and F. So we start on F, and then we just slowly go up. So we're going to go to F, then we'll do octave slur on G, number 1 on G, number 1 on A, B, and then C. C is going to be the most challenging for them because it goes the highest. And so you don't have to do all of those at once. It's like you slowly build on it. Once we get good at F, let's add G. Now we're going to add A. But C will be a challenge. And hopefully, if you're doing this correctly, the timing of which you're working on uncovered head joint flexibility exercises will match when you finally get to C octave slur. Does that make sense? The way you time out your class. Okay? And then that's going to be about the time too that you want to start using number 2 harmonics. And again, you can just do one. Just do the first one of number 2 until we feel really comfortable with it. And again, with the harmonic, do you guys understand harmonics on the flute? Somewhat?
Can you?
I'll elaborate on it, sure. So basically what I'm doing here, anytime there is a diamond-shaped note that is a harmonic, it means I'm not going to move my fingers. So what am I going to finger? I'm going to finger F as I play C. Okay? Sorry, that was nasty. So I didn't move any fingers, it's all here.
Can they
Okay.
try that and we can watch their fingers?
Yeah, let's try. If you don't know how to finger F, it's just thumb, 1, 2, 3, 4, and pinky. So let's just try the low F first, okay? Good. Good, and you want to be sure no arms on the chair. I'll tell that to my beginners. So you want the flute to be a little more outwards. Yeah, good. Okay, now let's try the octave slur. Remember, we're not going to blow harder on the second note. We're going to push the air upwards without blowing harder. So let's just do this. Me first. Bottom lip moving as you do this. If I don't see your bottom lip moving, I know you ain't doing it right. That's how we say it in West Texas. But okay, and then we just take it one step further. So on the harmonic, my bottom lip is just going to go out further. Okay. So sometimes I'll even say, now we're going to go to the second to the third note. So let's do that. We'll start second to the third note. I'm like bouncing around. I wouldn't recommend doing that. So the point is you're trying to do that as smoothly as possible. Okay, and once they're able to do this fundamental, the third octave is going to seem way, way less scary when you actually get to it. So the point is you do harmonics first. You learn harmonics first before you learn anything in the third octave. And I promise you, when they get to the third octave, they're like, oh, playing high is not hard at all on flute. It's because you did this first. Okay, yes?
By the end of the first year, how many notes should the student be able to play on just the in your mind?
Oh, do you mean actually like going
like
further?
open and close.
I really just do those 2 pitches on
Okay.
head joint. Me
So,
personally.
just like so 2 on each. So
2 on each. Uh-huh.
Okay.
Really good question. So the covered is just the higher and then the lower, and then uncovered, same thing. Okay, and by the way, when you do uncovered, it's roughly an A, although it's a flat A. But just FYI. Okay,
So
yes?
when you go up to the harmonics,
Uh-huh.
C, if it's really airy sounding, is that because the aperture's not?
There's lots of things.
Okay.
It could be that it's the direction of the air is not correct. It could be that this is too high, this vertical plane, and it could be that the aperture is too big. So yeah, you do you notice that I still have a really good tone on my harmonic? It's not. They're going to sound like that in the third octave as well. Yes, ma'am. Okay, thank you. All right, other questions about that? Okay, I know I still have a ton to cover. I'm sorry, but you're going to have these slides too, so I'll tell you my contact information. If there's something I didn't get to, you can always contact me. I love talking with people, and I'll be here for the next couple of days if you'd like to talk more about flute. I'd be happy to. Okay. All right. So again, these get more complex. We talked about these already. So there's a harmonic, which is the diamond-shaped note, and then the note with the star is when you switch to the quote-unquote real fingering. And what this is it's teaching the students what to do with the air first, and then we move the fingers. So we're focusing on one fundamental, and then we build upon it. Okay? And then it gets pretty tricky. Number 6 is hard. My students hate me when I make them play number 6. And I'm like, it's so good for you. So, okay? All right. And by the way, I have links in the end of this PowerPoint. There's links to these full exercises. These are just clips of them. Yes, I put them all in there. Shall we talk about this real quick since we don't have much time? I'll go real quickly with how I teach vibrato. Okay? So how to accomplish the pulse? Well, it's like we're thinking of a wave. And many times when people draw vibrato, this is something that I started doing a few years ago. And actually, Tamara, you like this. Many people think of vibrato like this, right? It's just kind of up and down. for me, that was too stationary, and I also was trying to teach my students, well, the purpose of vibrato is also that we're intensifying the sound and we're pushing the phrase forward. So there's a musicality element to it. So for me, visually, this made more sense. So that's why I like to use that shape. I'm actually not only going up and down, but I'm thinking about the forward direction of the phrase when I'm doing my vibrato. Okay? So I'm going to start with notes separated by going hoo, 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 and then I slowly connect the notes with the air. And it really is that simple. So when I say hoo into the flute, I'm not using my tongue. I'm just going. And then I eventually connect those with the air. So they're feeling that sort of a pulse. Okay? It's actually very simple to do that if you do it that way. All right, I tend to start with eighth notes. On an easier note, F, you can even start a little higher. Sometimes F is a little bit low to start, but if you're already playing in that register, hopefully you are, it shouldn't feel that difficult. So I just do it going up an F scale. Just like this, okay? And then the next step is, I might even have them start separated and then slowly make the notes longer. And then it eventually turns into, it's a spinning feeling. So it's like I say, okay, make it slightly longer until they're connected. So that helps too. Many times students will try to make the throat too tight, so you have to be sure that the throat is relaxed. Okay, and then I do this in triplets. I always say the pulses should be very wide and obnoxious. I always tell them the story about when I used to go to church with my grandma, and she would be singing. She'd be like, ooh, and so I was like, I want like old lady church vibrato is what I always said. So you want it to be really obnoxious and really wide in the beginning because they're getting that feel of things. Okay, and then the way that I finally apply it to music, and again, I have a full page of these simple little tunes, and they're really nice to play. This is Over the Rainbow. I just called it No Place Like Home. And you're going to practice pulses on anything that is that should be longer than a quarter note. Sorry, that's a typo. A quarter note or longer, we want to be sure that we're doing pulses. So I'm starting first with eighth notes, and I'm going to just play my music like this. Okay, and then I do triplets. And then 16ths. And about that time, the vibrato is going to be pretty close to being ready to use. So I just sort of build up to that.
They're worried about director's band, so we
Oh,
we
no,
stop on time
it's okay.
on this one. But
It's
they're,
okay.
they're still listening. As
No,
they
it's
break
fine.
out.
It's fine. No problem. And I have a whole page, like I said, of simple tunes like this that you can do with your students. And so there's one that's like Swan Lake and things like that. And so you're going to have all of that stuff. Okay? So I'll just go quickly through this because I know I need to wrap up. I do have progressive articulation and double tongue exercises. You should definitely start on one note and slowly get to where you're incorporating those fingers. And then there's technique exercises. You really, by the way, need to read over the 3 B-flat fingerings and when and why we use them. That is so important. So I have a slide for each of those. Okay? And then I have, this is how I teach articulation. I make them do different articulation groupings with different scales and things. So this is the good page. These are all links. I have the full exercises for you. And I wrote every one of these exercises. They're all mine, so I'm sharing them. I did not steal them, which is actually kind of cool. And so there you go. There it is. And you should have that posted on the website.
Yeah,
and
it
then
looks
here's
like
my info.
all the links are working. So if you go to the same article I'm telling the online people, and I just scrolled down to the bottom and clicked, and the first thing I clicked on opened, so it looks like
Cool. This is my information. That is my cell phone number. You can text me. That's fine. And that is my email for school. If you have other questions, and I know I didn't get to everything because I wanted to give you a lot of information, but I went over the good stuff, I think. So I would be happy to stick around and talk to you.
Through Friday, through Saturday?
I think Friday morning is when
Okay.
I'm leaving, and so I'll be around today and tomorrow. If you'd like to have some conversations with me about flute, I'd be thrilled to talk to you. So please let me know.
Thank you.
And I please need your flutes and pneumopros back because I'll get